Today's guest is Chetan Druve. Chetan is a systems thinker and the author of the books Why Your Boss is Programmed to Be a Dictator and How to Think About Marriage. He has an MBA from the Base Business School, London, and MA in International Journalism from City St. George's University, again Luck, and a BSc in Physics, Electronics, and Mathematics from St. Joseph's College, Bangalore. He has worked for several large and small organizations in various capacities, mostly in the field of management consultant and information technology. Let's jump into the conversation. Hey, Chetan.
Hi, Mani. Good to see you.
Hey, good to see you. Chetan, I know you have multiple facets, like you're a management consultant earlier. You're also a writer and you're also a business strategist. So it'll be very interesting to hear it from you saying what you're doing actually.
Okay. Good question, Manish. So I'll start off with what I'm doing right now, which focuses on a field of study called systems thinking. And I'll tell you how that came about. So systems thinking is this field of study that came as a response to analysis, the limitations of analysis specifically. And I came to it through essentially work and also through personal relationships. Systems thinking is a field of study that looks at how things interact, not just analysis, which looks at how you solve a problem by taking things apart. Systems thinking is the opposite of that. So currently, I'm an advisor. In systems thinking, I've written a couple of books that have systems thinking prominently featured in them. So I would say the core of my work right now is systems thinking. I can go into it in a bit more detail if you'd like, but the core of it is systems thinking as of now. The strategy and all the rest of it, that was part of my older profession, if I can call it management consulting, where I looked at helping businesses, position themselves, brand themselves, and all the rest of it, all the stuff you already know. But there's a ton of people who are already doing that, and I don't think I'm going to add much value. And then systems thinking came about, which was infinitely more interesting for me. But I can do the business strategy stuff. It's like I can do that in my seat now. So
So the thing is that the more interesting part is what is the founding story behind it? Like, how did you transition from a management consultant into the path to system thinking? So how did that happen actually?
yeah, that's an excellent question. So I was doing management consulting, as you know. I worked for in England for 12 years. I was apart from management consulting, I did business development, product marketing, business strategy, and all the rest of it. And then what happened, like in a lot of cases, I got hit by bad bosses. By hit, I don't mean literally hit, but I had bad bosses in my career, four in a row, which was quite amazing, actually. And I started thinking about the issue of bad bosses in general, rather than saying this is my problem. I said, how come this is a problem that exists for everybody, right? It's not just me who's had a bad boss. A lot of people, if you work long enough in a corporate career, you will have a bad boss at some point. And I had studied systems thinking as an elective during my MBA. And suddenly all that stuff came back to me. All the systems thinking flavor that I'd learned in my MBA was a little different from what I'm doing now. But I realized I could apply systems thinking to the issue of bad bosses. And then from that came my first book, which is called Why Your Boss is Programmed to Be a Dictator. Right. So I use systems thinking to show that how it's not the individual who's typically to blame. It's a system that's driving the behavior. It's not the person himself. A normal tendency, and I guess it's it seems obvious, is that if someone's behaving in a particular way, we blame that person, right? We say he's behaving like this because he's like this or she's like this. What I found through systems, through understanding systems, is that the system can drive you to a particular behavior, regardless of who you are, man, woman, whatever it is. I can drive you to a particular behavior. I can design the system in such a way that I can get the behavior that I want, and you won't even know this is happening, right? So in the corporate workplace, I realized the system is set up for the bosses to behave dictatorially. It's whoever the person is, right? Remember, corporates have been around for a long time. Boss behavior has not changed for decades, for centuries, maybe, right? So it's not the individual. So whoever you put in that situation is behaving like a boss, like a dictator. Why? So once you know it's the system, then to get the behavior that you want, you have to change the systems to get the behavior that you want. Training isn't going to work because you train the person in a different system. He's outside the office and you put him back at the corporate workplace, which is a different system. You will get the behavior that's appropriate to that system, right? And then, of course, as you know, I've also applied this to marriage, right? I've applied systems thinking to marriage because I realized that, especially in the West, the divorce rate is really high. And that's happening in India as well. So again, I said, hang on, if individuals are not the problem, right? Because people are getting divorced all over the world. So it's not about the individual. So I said, what is it about the marriage system that's creating these behaviors? So once you understand the system, you'll understand the behavior. And then once you understand the system, you can change it or change your approach to it to get the behavior that you want. Right. So it's pretty exciting. I mean, it also makes you look at the world very differently. That's the main thing in systems thinking, right? It changes your worldview completely.
After listening to the marriage book, I was able to ask you actually, did you find the dictator within those two people inside the marriage?
Of course. So I mean, my first book talks about, the biggest problem with the boss is that there's a big power differential, right, between the boss and the subordinate. The system then is that of a dictatorship, because the subordinate doesn't get to elect the leader, so to speak. And in the corporate world, we talk about group leader, project leader, team leader, and all the rest of it. We call them leaders, but they're not leaders, but they're dictators by definition because they haven't been elected to the by the people who they have power over, right? So that's the definition of a dictator, right? And then because of that being a dictatorship system, you'll get behaviors appropriate to that system. So similarly in a marriage, if there's a power differential, you will get the same behavior. So
Absolutely,
that's
yeah.
why if you look at traditionally, right, when men had all the power, right, women were not allowed to get a divorce, women had all the financial power. You're physically stronger than the woman and all the rest of it. I'm talking about some time back before divorce was legalized. Men tended to abuse women because they had all the power, right? Now, that has been addressed through laws and all the rest of it. Uh, so you will have some balance of power. In that case, you will have behavioral change. So training people to behave differently is a lot more difficult than changing the system around them, changing power differentials to get the behavior that you want. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. What I understood from this conversation is that this stemmed from a very personal experience in your corporate life. All right. So you are doing this as a profession now. System thinks this as a profession now, right? So apart from, I strongly believe usually when people do such, either they are a solopreneur or a consultant or starting a startup or a business, apart from money, there is always another reason behind that pushes them to do this. People call it purpose. So what is that purpose that is actually driving you to do this, apart from money and prominence and stuff we normally talk about?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question because it really strikes to the heart of what I'm doing or trying to do at least, right? Money is, of course, an important part of it. But, having suffered really to use that term with bad bosses, and I know I mean, I've gotten away really lightly. Honestly, nothing that bad happened to me that I was traumatized for life and all the rest of it. But I've seen it happen to people where things have been so bad that it's they've needed therapy and all the rest of it, right? So there's an enormous amount of suffering that's happening in all corporate workplaces, even now as we speak, right? There are people suffering from bad bosses and all the rest of it. I'm not blaming the boss. I want to repeat that it's the system, right? So I'm hoping that with people getting more exposure to my work, we can actually make a difference to the corporate workplace so that two things. One is that the suffering is reduced or eliminated completely. Suffering is a big part of it. But also, I found through my work, right, when you have dictatorship systems at work, it's bad for the organization itself, right? So the case studies that I've got in my book, I've shown, how like there was a plane crash because this happened because of the bus subordinate, power differential. The two space shuttle disasters that happened because of this. So it's bad for the organization. So let's say you're in a situation where there's a subordinate who knows something is going to go very wrong, right, leading to loss of life, very very serious, right? They still don't open their mouths, or they may not open their mouths because of what backlash they're going to get, right? And then the disaster happens, and then, you know, you can't blame anybody, right? The system is set up in a way that that guy has to keep quiet, and he will keep quiet. If he doesn't keep quiet, he'll get chopped out, which is typically what happens to what are called whistleblowers, right? So it's to reduce human suffering. That's the first thing. The other thing is to protect the organization itself. So you have a lot of corporate policies that say do the right thing, do this, do this, do this, and someone might point out that hey, the wrong thing is being done, and despite saying that I'm saying what corporate policy is, you might have a boss whose image or whatever's being at risk because of this, and they shut down that person. And the point is that boss is able to do that because of the power they have, right? So it is somewhat of a mission for me, if I could say. I mean, yeah, it's a mission for me. So two things. One is, of course, the application of systems thinking. So one is, like I said, to the corporate workplace, and marriage is also to a topic obviously very dear to my heart because I've written about it, right? And I've done a lot of research, and the reason I feel, based on all the work I've done, that so many people have trouble with marriage. Not, it's worldwide. It's a worldwide problem, right? It's not just a problem here or in the West. And it's going to become a problem that's going to get worse with time. is that people aren't looking at marriage the right way. Therefore, all these issues are happening, right? Marital breakdown, fights, arguments, and all the rest of it. So if you knew what you were dealing with from a systemic sort of systems lens, you'd look at the problem very differently, which means you'd behave differently, right? So, for example, if I say, if I don't tell you this, right, and I say, money, we're going out somewhere, and you say, okay, and you dress up like we're going like to the beach, and then suddenly I take you to a jungle for a hike, you're not prepared at all for it, right? But if I tell you, hey, money, we're going to the jungle, you can still enjoy the trek, but your preparation and your mindset is going to be very different, right? So, what systems thinking does is it changes your view of things, right? So, I will not need to train you, hey, money, do this, money, do that, or X person should do this. I'll just say, hey, this is what's happening. Once you know what's happening, automatically you will do the right thing, right? You will not need training, right? So again, from a purpose perspective, right? Obviously, bad marriages are not good for anybody, and they're especially bad for children, right? So my point is, if you kind of fix that issue, I don't mean fix like repair the issue or whatever. I'm just saying look at the situation different, the issue differently. And if you have better marriages as a result of that, it's good for kids, it's good for the couple, and it's good for society in general. Stable marriages are generally a good thing. So those are the two applications of it. Last I did a project applying systems thinking to net zero and climate change issues. But apart from application, what I'm trying to do through application of systems thinking in these fields that I've spoken about is to actually tell people about this field called systems thinking that exists. Right? Hey, there's a way to look at problems using analysis. You can't solve all problems. So sometimes you have to look at the problem differently itself, and systems thinking allows you to do that. I mean, it enables that. Right? So, for example, if you analyze the body, typically analysis what we use to break it down into heart, lungs, kidneys, blah blah blah. You can't just take the heart out of the body, fix it, and put it back and hope that the body will continue working. It won't. Right? It'll die. So when you're looking at the body, because of the interactions amongst the parts, critical to systems thinking is a term called interactions. You look at how things interact, not just how things behave on their own. Right. So when you look at the human body, it's important to know that there's blood circulating, everything's interacting with everything else and so forth. Right. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Chetik. Yeah.
No, that's it. So I'm just saying I'm trying to evangelize systems thinking too, in a sense.
So tell me if I've got it right. See, there are two realms I'm seeing it as a purpose that's panning out. One is either it's to elevate suffering, or is it to promote stability? Is that why you're doing this? Is it what that pushes you to do implement thinking everywhere? Is that your purpose?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, okay. Let me reframe purpose in terms of systems thinking. So it's when you're a kid, your purpose is I will change the world. I will do this. That. So I become prime minister. I'll change 100 different things. Right. What I realized is that I mean that's why I went to journalism in the first place. Having a science background, I went into journalism. I did a master's in international journalism, saying I'll change the world through my writing about politics. Right, which is obviously in retrospect is stupid. But I got a bunch of good skills from the journalism, researching, writing well, communicating, interviewing skills, asking questions, and all the rest of it, right? So those skills are very useful right now. But in terms of purpose, what I realized is that as you go through life, you personally experience problems, right? I mean, everybody has problems, but I'm thinking, so I've learned this sort of approach to problems, which is if I'm having a problem, let me see if other people are having the same problem, right? If a lot of people are having the same problem, if I can fix that problem, then a lot of people will be benefited if I fix that problem, right? So that's the approach I've taken. So this marriage thing wasn't on my mind at all when I wrote my first book. But in the process of writing my first book, I realized that this approach could be applied to marriage. And then I gave recently a talk on systems thinking to a bunch of doctors and surgeons in a hospital in Bangalore because I know a doctor, right? And he said this is a very good thing for doctors to know about, right? So I went and gave a talk there. So I'm hoping that if you can influence the medical profession a little bit. So you're making an impact in that sense. You see what
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
saying, right? So that's
yeah,
my
yeah.
approach. Yeah, yeah.
So when you actually implement or teach people systems thinking, how does your consultative process actually brings your purpose to life? How do people experience it?
Okay, so first of all, right, systems thinking is not new. It's been around since the 1930s, 1940s, but it's not very well known. Okay, it's like I'm sure you did study systems thinking in any of
No,
your courses. Have you?
no, I haven't.
Yeah. So people say, "Oh, I've studied systems engineering." That's very different from the systems thinking that I'm talking about. So I've studied electronics as well. So there is some systems engineering and feedback and some concepts like that are there in electronics also in engineering. But that's not what I'm talking about, right? This is sort of a different sort of systems thinking. I don't want to go into detail. So the first part in this consultative process is to actually tell people, hey, this is what it is, and this is how I'm going to be addressing the problem differently from what you're used to. See, it's a different thing when a systems thinker comes and says to you, hey, I want you to look at this problem from this systems thinking angle, and I don't have to explain what systems thinking is, right? Usually I have to start by explaining what it is. So when I talk about, like, say, my boss book, the title is what hooks their attention, right? Why your boss is programmed to be a dictator. And they'll be like, hey, that's interesting. My boss is blah, 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 right? And then they'll be like, how have you come to this title? Like, why are you saying the boss is programmed to be like this? And I'll be like, hey, the system is driving this behavior. And then, so your hook is not systems thinking usually. You're like, hey, obviously when you say manage, everybody wants to listen to you, right? When you say manage. And I'm not asking them about their marital problems. I'll be like, hey, everybody has issues in marriage. But here, if you use this sort of thinking, it'll help you look at marriage differently and help you solve the problem. So you're not attacking or you're not telling people about systems thinking upfront, but then you kind of weave it into the story. And then once they understand a bit of it, right, then that kind of makes more sense to them. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, because explaining this itself takes a little bit of time, right?
Exactly.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
is that one of the challenges, or have you faced what are the challenges you faced building this entire concept?
Multiple challenges, multiple challenges. So just from a purely marketing perspective, right, which is, where you come in. When I wrote my first book, when your first book is like your baby, right, and you're just excited to talk to everyone about it, and you're just talk, talk, talk. That's all you're doing. Any person you meet who's a stranger, of course, your family's sick and tired of it, and your friends are sick and tired of it. And then I would realize that people are listening to me, but they're not enthused, even though they could connect with the topic, right? But when I say, hey, read the book, like one friend of mine borrowed the book, and then every week, hey, have you read it? Have you read it? For 2 months, I'm asking, have you read it? He's saying, no. I'm thinking, is the book boring? Right? And I'm like, I can take criticism. One thing you learn in journalism is that people are going to yell at you about your work, and you're like, fine, that's okay. So I said, if it's a bad book, tell me. I can take it. And he's like, at some point, he said, Chetan, to be honest, I don't like reading. I don't like reading books. So your problem is not your particular product. It's a problem with the product in general. So after that, what I started doing is before I spoke about my book, my first question would be like, do you like reading books? If they said no, I talk about the concept, not talk about the book, right? Because you're like, this is not my target audience. I need to find someone who likes reading books, right? So that's a higher level challenge. Then the challenge that you spoke about, right? You're trying to talk about a concept that's very that's not known to most people, right? So you have to hold their attention. Then there are a lot of terminal systems thinking that sound like jargon. Emergent properties, system boundaries, feedback loops, causal loop diagrams. And you don't want to talk about that when you're explaining these things to people because they just switch off, right? So that's definitely a challenge, the time it takes to explain to people. And you know this, right? People have very shortest attention spans right now, right? So it's very difficult to encapsulate everything I'm saying in like 30 seconds. I can do it. For example, if I say to you, if I'm trying to explain gravity to you, I can say, money, gravity is you throw a ball up, it's going to come down. That's gravity. Right? Have I explained the whole of gravity to you? I haven't, right? If I start explaining gravity, then through a process, I can say, hey, this will lead to satellites. This will lead to space stations. This will lead to rockets. This will lead to space flight, right? So many things once you understand gravity fully. But I can explain it in 30 seconds. Throw a ball up, it'll come down. That's gravity. But you've not shown the power of the concept of gravity, right? So that's what happens with systems thinking. I can say systems thinking is about interaction, systems affect behavior. So what, right? People are just going to say, take deal. But to show the power of systems thinking, it takes time, it takes energy, it takes effort, it takes a lot of attention on the other person's side, right? That's the challenge.
Oh, that seems hard, but if somebody still decides to take your path into systems thinking,
Yeah.
what is your advice to them?
My advice would be, of course, read up a lot about it, know what you're saying, but there's a very fine line that you have to draw between making it simple and easy enough to understand without it becoming so simplistic that it becomes useless, right? And what's unfortunately happened in the systems thinking world is that, for people, there's a bit small bunches of people trying to talk about systems thinking and all the rest of it. And one part of systems thinking is this thing called causal loop diagrams. It's like a really, really complex diagram, and people look at it and they just freeze. Right. And my point is, I don't even do those big diagrams. There's no point, right? People just switch off. Once you lose people, there's no point. However smart you are, whatever, however intelligent the stuff you're saying is, if you lose people, there's no point, right? So it's like keep it simple just to the extent that they can understand what's going on and leave them with enough knowledge of systems thinking that they can apply it themselves, right? So once I teach you the concepts, systems thinking is not like rocket science or anything. Honestly, it's common sense. If I tell you your behavior is affected by interacting with people around you, you're not going to be like, hey, wow, this is news to me, right? You're not going to say that. You're like, of course, I know that. Systems thinking just gives you some sort of concepts and names to put to some concepts which will be useful to you. That's it. That's all it is. It's not like, you don't become a doctor. You don't become some doctor of systems thinking. It's just a way of looking at the world. That's all it is. Right. So it's not rocket science. It's very simple at its core.
Beautiful. See, if people want to know more about you and about systems thinking, where they can follow you.
Basically, I'm on Twitter, not very active, but I am on Twitter. So at CV Dhruv, and my website is cvdhruv.com. You can get more information about my books on my website, and you'll see reader comments of my first book on the website as well.
We'll put it down in the description, definitely.
Yeah.
Then this is wonderful listening to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Mani, for having me.